Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson, back with our mini-series, Longevity for Investors, with my great co-host, Dr. Greg Bailey, Chairman of Juvenescence, and a well-known biotech investor, as well as in other spaces. Greg, why don't you introduce our great guest this week?
Yeah, very excited to have Piraye on the call with us. Unfortunately, I have to say that she's one of the few CEOs in biotech, female CEOs, which is a terrible situation, and hopefully we'll rectify. And there's been some interesting moves by the Biden administration to help facilitate that we're going to hear more about. Piraye, why don't you give us your background and how you got into being a CEO of a biotech company, and particularly in the context that this is investing in longevity in biotech, which checks multiple boxes with what you're doing.
Great. Hi, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to share today a little bit more about what we're doing. So I'm Dr. Piraye Yurttas Beim. I did my PhD at Cornell's Medical School I don't want to do the math on that, but a long time ago, did my postdoctoral work in Cambridge, which is a long way of saying that I've been innovating in women's health for a little over 20 years. And originally, I started off in the ivory tower in academia, assuming that was where the best work could be done. My work was focused on women's gynecological cancers early on. And I had the benefit, as someone who started my PhD in 2001, of really being a genomics native into biotech, meaning that I've always had genomics as part of my academic training and my life as a scientist. And so I got very passionate about precision medicine, but through my PhD and postdoc, I realized that this incredible revolution of big data and genomics and eventually AI that was happening in oncology wasn't translating into women's health more broadly. And so I left academia in 2009 to found Celmatix as the first precision medicine company focused uniquely on women's health. And our goal was pretty simple, but in retrospect, pretty radical, which is that we wanted to understand what it really meant to be female biologically on a cellular and molecular level, because we know that women are disproportionately impacted by a number of conditions. And also we know that the way that we develop certain conditions like heart disease, Alzheimer's, et cetera, those mechanisms of what set those conditions into motion are a little different for women than for men. And so we really set out to say, but what are the molecules involved? What does this really mean biologically? And so I just felt with the funding rates in academia that are so low for women's health and for precision medicine in this space, that I could better progress that in the private sector as an entrepreneur. And so I left my postdoc and kind of took the leap as an entrepreneur, and I haven't looked back.
So when you descended out of the ivory tower into the reality of the business world, what were your biggest shocks or surprises?
Well, from a practical standpoint, it was a different language. So there are so many 3-letter acronyms in the business world. So, which I think itself has an acronym. I think those are TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. So just from the most simple things, like I didn't know what a P&L was. I didn't know what a profit and loss statement was. Somebody asked me for our P&L, and I emailed an advisor and said, I need a P, N as in Nancy, L. Where can I find that? And he said, I think you mean an ampersand. So I really was starting from -10 as far as my business knowledge went. So I thought it was going to be mostly science that I was going to be doing. And what I've learned is that the science is the fun part. The science is the part that keeps me going and I'm doing it for. But I've had to really climb a learning curve very quickly as a CEO and bring a lot of business knowledge on board, which, we'll get on the soapbox on that later. But these are things that easily could be incorporated into graduate education and is not, and maybe helps explain why we don't have more innovation in the private sector. Because it feels so inaccessible when a scientist feels like they can't speak the language of the business world.
First products you brought to market, and then I'll turn it over to Jess. Or first products that you began to work on, or that you're most excited about.
Yeah. So one of my favorite papers in all of science is a paper announcing the double helix. And what I love about that paper is that it's very technical. And then the last paragraph, they say something along the lines of, it hasn't escaped our notice that the double helix gives us some idea about how genetics may work as a result, right? Like that was the most important part of the entire paper, but it's a kind of British understatement at the end. And we structured our original investor deck that way too, which is that we talked about we're going to build this data set, we're going to decode biomarkers and genetic drivers of female-specific disease, we're going to launch diagnostic tools and digital health tools. And the very last slide of the deck was, it hasn't escaped our notice that if we're able to do these things, we will be sitting on top of the next century of biological targets for therapeutic discovery in this field. And what I will say is that has been pretty much our trajectory. We built the data set, we launched digital health and diagnostic products, which helped us accumulate more and more data. And then eventually we were ready to move into therapeutics, originally in partnership with pharmaceutical companies, and then eventually decided it was time to spread our wings and become a standalone biotech. And that's where we are today.
Yes.
Well, I want to talk about what you just said about raising money. This is something that entrepreneurs never get enough information on. Fund managers never get enough information on. Nonprofit leaders always want to know about. When you think about the state of the world today, interest rates are higher, but appear to be coming down a little bit. Maybe the biotech winter is over. Like all these different things in the world post-COVID here, what advice do you have? Let's say all entrepreneurs, not even biotech. What's a principle that you feel like has helped you raise the money when, you might be more likely to be struck by lightning than get money from a VC?
Well, so just as background, in 2021, which was a banner year for VC, that's the year when VC funding doubled. The average deal size for a women's health company was only $4 million. So less than 1% of capital goes to women's health, less than 2% of capital goes to female founders. So we were kind of like, we're kind of double hot sauce, female founder, women's health. So it's been really a fun ride raising money for this company for the last 15 plus years. So what I will say is I have never raised a dollar from traditional VCs. They have not embraced our space. I think that's going to change. I think this next round, we're going to hit it, out of the ballpark, finally into the institutional money. But what we have done is we've had to just be very creative. So we've raised, I think, approximately $140 million of capital through different sources. And it has meant that we are constantly fundraising. Celmatix, the company that I founded, has never had more than 12 months of runway from a funding standpoint. And I'm in year 16. So it's been interesting. So where have we raised the money? We've raised the money from family offices, which can be really long-term aligned. We've raised money from folks who either were very passionate about data and what data could unlock generally. And this is kind of in the lead up to all of the AI excitement that's been finally coming to fruition recently. It has been family offices that are interested in the women's health mission and understand how underserved female founders are and women's health is. And these have been great partners. In addition to family offices, we've also been creative in striking strategic deals with pharma and have brought some revenue in that way, and have had some other sources of non-dilutive proceeds as well. Most recently, last week, Greg alluded to this, we are recipient of H, which is part of the Biden administration's Sprint for Women's Health. And so we're very proud of that. We got money from the Gates Foundation over the years. So we've just had to be scrappy. And I'd say the number one rule is you're always fundraising. Even if you just closed your round. In our case, we were actually always fundraising because we never got that much runway. But I don't care who you are or how relaxed you think you are always fundraising. If you're an entrepreneur and a CEO, you always have to have that hat on.
Yeah. Well, it's great that family office money sounds great, who maybe are a little more understanding of what it takes to build a business over the long term instead of just need to raise their next fund, right? They're not typically found in the phone book, though. Any principles that you would share with entrepreneurs about not just finding out about a family office, but getting them to want to have a meeting?
Yeah, you're right. They are not found in a phone book. Well, I'll tell you, let's start with how not to find family offices, because we've gotten wooed by, there's a number of people out there who are happy to interject themselves between innovators and family offices. And they will, meet you at different events and say, hey, sign this deal with me, pay me this money, and I will find you family offices. And that is a very attractive prospect. What I will say is we've done that multiple times and it has not yielded fruit. What does work is networking. And I know that that's a cliche, and maybe not that non-obvious, but I think you have to put yourself in the mix and you have to shamelessly be okay asking for money. You just have to, right? And this is awkward for me. I'll back up and say I was raised by academic leftists. They were kind of left-leaning academics. Money was not something you talked about. You certainly didn't ask for it from strangers. And so for me, both given my family of origin and also given my training as a scientist, it made me very uncomfortable originally to ask for money. But what I realized is that there's plenty of people out there who are happy to direct those funds to things that are not as exciting as I think the mission is that we're progressing at Celmatix. So, so I think it really has just been accept the invitations, go to the events. Greg and I mean, you can relate, Greg, we're on planes a lot. We kiss a lot of frogs. But it's great. You tell the story and you get a sense of whether this is something that they're passionate about. Sometimes they'll make a direct investment and you maintain a relationship with the principal at the family office. Sometimes they will introduce you to their team, depending on how big it is, and then they'll run a more kind of VC-like due diligence process. But I think you just have to put yourself out there. There's no other way to do it. You can't look it up online. You can't find it in a book.
Yeah. Well, Greg, maybe I'll ask the same question to you and then turn it over for you for more questions. You think about all the fundraising you've done over the years and have been successful with some very large family offices. What would you add, or what's some of your perspective?
Just to reiterate, actually, it's a continuous process. The middlemen are really annoying. Oh, I've got 100 family offices that I can introduce you to. And the other thing that I found is you are told that a family office is interested, or you're coming to an event, but they're not coming to the event to hear you, and they're not coming to the event to invest in you. So I've gone to so many events where I've been introduced to family offices, but they didn't really want to hear what they weren't there because of me, as opposed to a dedicated meeting that, Piraye has mentioned, where they have set up to meet you. They're interested in what you're doing. World of difference, and so that would be the big thing that I would add as well.
Well,
yeah, and I'll just add one more thing, which is patience, because I think family offices are often, once they're in and you've built that trust, they're great long-term partners, but it takes time to build trust like any relationship, and they're not as transactional. I think they're a little bit more relationship-based. They have a lower risk tolerance from a relationship and a reputational standpoint, but a very high risk tolerance for doing incredible work from a scientific standpoint. So I think if you don't get them excited in that first meeting, that's okay. I think you don't want to come on too strong. You just want to share. If it's good timing, that's great. If not, you continue to cultivate that relationship. And I think over time, they also like to co-invest with other top family offices. So I think it's, they kind of travel in their own herds, a little bit like VCs like to syndicate, family offices like to as well. So it does require patience, and it's something that you build iteratively over time.
Makes so much sense. Greg, what other questions do you have?
So for the investors in the audience and how they think about investing in women's medicine, which I think, to your point, is about to see an extraordinary uptick. I think the world is getting it, that 51% of the population is of that sex, and that these are their issues. So it's a good group to go after. How would you recommend they begin to think about investing in women's health?
Yeah, the way that I'd like to get people kind of warmed up to the space, if they aren't already bought in, is it feels, Greg, to your point, like the addressable market should sell itself, right? Over half of the planet, high unmet need, which is another way of saying lots of white space, lots of opportunities. However, the challenge is that there's a perception that the science isn't ready. There's a reason why there's white space. The FDA doesn't like women's health, et cetera. So it's a bit of an uphill battle if you try to, let's say, get investors who are not women's health investors already excited about things that they would consider classic women's health. So I'm talking about fertility, for example, menopause, for example. What I like to do is to point out to investors that most investors are women's health investors already. They just don't realize it. So for example, Alzheimer's, 2/3 of all people impacted by Alzheimer's are female biologically. I think thyroid disease is over 90%. Osteoporosis, ditto. Heart disease is something that women are protected from while their ovaries are functioning premenopausally, but they're disproportionately impacted by postmenopausally. So the majority of people who are impacted by heart disease postmenopause are female. There's so many conditions, autoimmune disorders. There's a lot of investors who have invested in MS or lupus. They don't realize that 80% of people with autoimmune disorders are female. So I like to build a bridge by saying, if you've invested in any of these things, you already are a women's health investor. You just weren't thinking about it through that lens. And I feel like that's kind of the gateway drug to get them excited about like the real stuff, like, like the hardcore stuff, like endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome. These are conditions that collectively impact 30% of women on Earth and don't have a single approved drug and no therapeutic that is disease modifying. So if you didn't say it was women's health, if you said to an investor, imagine a disease that impacts 15% of all women on, what is that about? Like 7.5% of humans. It's complete white space, right? People are highly motivated to join trials, are highly motivated to pay. And if you don't treat this condition, not only do you have debilitating symptoms early in life, but then you have all of these accumulated risk factors for longevity and later in life. They would be chomping at the bit, like, tell me more. I want to know about this incredible white space that is not overcrowded. As soon as you say it's polycystic ovary syndrome, it's like, okay, the ears get turned off. So I think we have to go in on the numbers and the business fundamentals, that these are just fundamentally, you don't have to care about women's issues. You don't have to care about any of this stuff. It's a good business. And quite frankly, if you didn't have the stigma of it being women's health, there's no other disease condition that would be left so barren from an innovation standpoint and an opportunity standpoint.
Thank you very much for that. So, as you're thinking about this, what areas should they focus on? Where do you think the next great opportunities are going to be within women's health?
I think if we're thinking from a longevity lens, for me, and I'm going to be biased in this because this is exactly where I've invested my human capital and my time, and my team has done the same, which is in ovarian health. So it's how you and I met, Greg. You gave a talk many years ago about longevity, and what was so refreshing is that you used the word ovary on stage. You said, it's great. We have these plans to address all of these things, but one of the unmet needs here is that if we're going to be living and having a well span to 100 and maybe a lifespan, beyond that, the ovary is only going to function for this tiny little percentage of our lifespan, which impacts women and men. And so I went up and I introduced myself to Greg and I said, you said ovary on a stage. This is incredible. No one ever talks about this. This was early. Now it's menopause is having its moment, which is another way of saying the ovary is starting to have its moment. But this was almost 10 years ago, I think, that you made that point. And we were quietly working. I know, time flies. So we were quietly working on a therapeutic program to extend ovarian function to align with the modern lifespan. So about 100 years ago, we lived about half as long. And as it happens, ovarian function lasts until about 50 on average. And we used to die before that. So demographically speaking, menopause existed, but it was just rare. And in one generation, we got to a place where the majority of women were outliving the function of their organ, the ovary. And what's incredible is that ovarian failure seems to be the only form of organ failure that, rather than treating it as a disease, we considered it a natural phenomenon. And now, with the kind of third feminist wave, we're being asked to celebrate it as this like empowerment moment for women. But in reality, if you've been looking at the data I've been looking at, and many of us now are feeling this way, decline in ovarian function in midlife, and what is now midlife, is the single biggest accelerant of all of the unhealthy diseases of aging. So unhealthy aging is really driven and accelerated by the loss of ovarian function in midlife. And so my view is that the biggest point of leverage, if you really want to extend female lifespan and health span, is addressing the fact that this key and vital gonad, that is an endocrine organ, it is a metabolic organ, it is an immune organ. It does a lot of things other than just making babies. This organ stops working, and we don't have a way to extend its function And we don't have a way to really replace what is lost, because estrogen and progesterone and testosterone through HRT is the tip of the iceberg of what we need to modulate and replenish when this organ stops working. So I believe the biggest opportunities are in ovarian health, which is a category that we defined within the therapeutic space about 6 years ago to really try to shed light on this idea that the ovary should be healthy. It's not a nice to have, a healthy ovary. And I think no one would doubt that healthy testes and testicular function are key to male vitality. In fact, the word testes comes from vitality, truth. It's considered like the source of your truth and vitality as a man. Well, ovaries are our testes too. I mean, it's the equivalent organ. It's just the female version. So anyway, so I'm very passionate, as you know, about ovarian health and about investments to extend ovarian health.
For the women who may be in our audience, this is so important that you become investors, because I think part of the problem for women's health has been that most funds are run by men, and you bring up testicular cancer, that they're all immediately listening. And, but if it's not your problem, it's less so. And so many people I meet in the sector are going after the illness because somebody in their family has it. It's a pathology that they're well acquainted with. So they should definitely do that. I think this is a great segue into the grant that you're getting. And you might want to talk about the process and what you went through to get this money and what your goal is with it, because I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for women's health.
Thank you. So I'll back up for a second and say that I saw this incredible panel between the COO of SpaceX and the head of NASA. And at the end of this incredible panel, the COO of SpaceX showed a blooper reel with clown music in the background of SpaceX blowing up rocket after rocket after rocket. Everybody was laughing. I had tears in my eyes, not because I was laughing, but because I was on the verge of tears, crying. Because I thought, in women's health, we don't get to blow up rockets. We don't get to do that. So what I will say is that we went down a path from a modality standpoint. So our target, which is anti-Mullerian hormone receptor, is a undruggable target. It's a TGF-beta receptor complex, and no one has really successfully developed a real drug for TGF-beta. And so there's a lot of reasons why it's the ideal target to go after, but this is really a drug discovery issue. This is not like, there's not a lot of biology risk. There's a lot of drug discovery risk in this program. So we invested about $20 million trying to tackle this. And I think no one's been in a position to take such a big swing. And we blew up our first rocket. So what we learned was how not to target this receptor complex. We fortunately now have a very high confidence level of how we can target it with an emerging novel modality. But we just hit up against roadblocks trying to raise money for our second attempt, which, again, is a celebrated part of SpaceX's story. We blew up all these rockets and then we finally got it right. And you don't get to do that in women's health. So what was incredible about the opportunity with ARPA-H is, and for people who don't know, ARPA-H is the Advanced Research Program Agency for Health. So a lot of people have heard of DARPA. We got the internet thanks to DARPA. And the Biden administration saw the impact that Operation Warp Speed had on therapeutic development in COVID and said, we need a mechanism different than the NIH, different than NSF, something more like DARPA, but for health, so that we can really sprint and go fast. And so they started that about 2 years ago. And then Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, announced the Women's Health Initiative last November, about a year ago, saying that we need to do better for women, all the things that we're talking about, high unmet need, high impact if we can fix these problems. As part of that, they directed over $100 million of ARPA-H dollars to something called the Women's Health Sprint. And a really remarkable thing happened. They got 1,700 applications overnight from, I think, over 40 countries, the majority of states plus DC. They were inundated with science from around the world to try to move the needle for women's health. And I think if there's any question that the science just isn't there, I think the ARPA-H experience just makes it clear that, the science is there, the funding is not there. And so it was a highly competitive process, but it was highly efficient. So I've applied for, foundation grants for NIH, things like that. This was really a remarkable experience where they made it very streamlined. So it was a 3-page application. And then from there, you were invited to give a pitch, which made it feel a lot more like an investor process rather than kind of a lengthy NIH style process. And then you had 15 minutes to pitch to a panel of 10 people. And then they announced the awards. And from start to stop, I think it all happened in less than 6 months. So remarkable. And we're very proud that they gave us some money to build our second rocket. So we get a second shot at this from a modality standpoint. And I think this one will succeed. And what's great for us is that I think if we can de-risk that key step, which is to have a molecule that can successfully target this receptor, because we have a platform already from a pharmacology standpoint, it'll move fast from there. And I think we can bring the private sector dollars in to complement this. It's really meant to be catalytic. The other thing I will say about ARPA-H that is really important is distinctive from getting like a research grant. This is a contract. We are now government contractors at Celmatix. Is that they come on board as a strategic partner. So they will advocate when we get to regulators. They will advocate when we get to payers. And that's important because a lot of women's health that has beaten the odds has either died at regulators or has made it through FDA, but the company kind of languishes as they cannot get payer reimbursement. And so to have the United States government on board as our strategic partner to get this thing into the hands of American women is a game changer for a company like Celmatix.
I'm stunned that the government ran that so efficiently and did that because, you look at defense contractors and the rubbish, that goes through. So well done them. Jess, do you have any questions about the rocket launch?
Yeah, I do. I think one of my favorite quotes is from Winston Churchill talking about how like the key is to go from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. And so I want to just talk about mental toughness and like your self-talk or like advice you have for other entrepreneurs based on your story of like, oh crap, that really didn't go the way I was hoping. And then like getting your game face back on, get back on the horse, is kind of like what that looked like for you, as I'm sure you've done multiple times in your life. And it sounds like this time maybe more dramatically.
I think for me, as I reflect on what's allowed me to continue to iterate, I hadn't heard that quote, but I love that quote. I'm gonna find that. Is staying close to people who are affected by these conditions. So one thing, so I have an Instagram handle, Boss Ovary, if anybody wants to follow me there. I posted something last night that I thought about when I was sitting in my office, which is that just this week alone, I have had multiple conversations with women in my network who have been advised by their physicians to have one or multiple of their female-specific organs removed. And so I get the call. And I was reflecting that this is not an unusual week for me. I get the call all the time from women saying they want to take my uterus out. They want to take my breast. They want to take my ovaries, my fallopian tubes, my cervix. The list is long. And I reflected that while we know that men do get conditions like testicular cancer and certainly lose their male-specific organs, I just don't get weekly calls from men saying, what do I do? They want to take all of these body parts off of my body, out of my body. And there's nothing that's more motivating, Jess, than getting a call like that. And people are always super apologetic. I'm so sorry to bug you, but my wife just had her third miscarriage, or I can't get anyone to answer my questions about my endometriosis or my adenomyosis or my polycystic ovary syndrome. I'm having this heavy menstrual bleeding and nothing's working. And they feel like they're wasting my time. Like, oh, I'm sorry to bug you with this little thing. But what they don't understand is that like, I couldn't possibly persist in this uphill battle to try to innovate in women's health without those phone calls. That's one. The second thing is I have a daughter. She's 7 now. And I will tell you, when I'm driving her to school and she asks me a question like, Mommy, are your medicines going to be ready in time for me? Stops you in your tracks. Stops you in your tracks. And talk about motivation to get up every day and build that second rocket after the first one blew up. It's pretty powerful.
I get that. My wife has some pretty severe medical issues, and my daughters have been passed on some of them. And Greg's been really great at making introductions, and he's got us reading all these books, and it's it's interesting to me how uninformed traditional medicine is, yet how many breakthroughs are happening. Like, between Greg and his friends, like, we keep getting answers that we haven't heard for 20 years. Like, in 20 plus years of these conditions with my wife, just in this last year hanging out with Greg, we like monthly find something out that no doctor she or I have ever talked to in 20 years knew about for her, and it's encouraging that people like you are pushing so hard, because my family needs it.
Thank you, Jess. So many families need it. And as far as the breakthroughs piece, I will say that what's interesting in the space is that when people ask me, what's the biggest opportunity, for innovation, it's, I talked about it, but the lowest hanging fruit is that, for example, if you take menopause, less than 10% of women even use the standard of care. And so to your point about it's hard to even get connected to information, less than 20% of OBGYN physicians who, in the US at least, kind of are like GPs for women, receive a single hour of training in menopause care. Less than 20%. It's crazy. So you're going to the doctor, and that's another common question I get from women who are navigating menopause in particular is, who do I go see? My OBGYN doesn't seem to know. My GP doesn't know. I went to an endocrinologist. Who am I supposed to go see? And the reality is that we have completely overlooked and neglected these conditions. So I don't have a good answer for that often. Yeah. I mean, it's getting better. It's getting better. The National Menopause, Society has a growing database of women who are now retraining and educating themselves as menopause specialists. But this is kind of, it is uncharted territory for all of us right now.
No kidding. My inner entrepreneur is just thinking about the opportunity there. Like, my business partner of 20 years is my brother, who's an AI engineer. And I'm thinking, hey, how fast can we spin up a website with all of the best data that's a Q&A AI to at least give people a start and be a recommendation engine? And anyway, Greg, I want to hand it back to you.
I love that.
That makes the question so much more difficult to interpret. So remarkable what you're doing. And, and I think that you are breaking so much ground in this area, and more power to you. If you are successful for your daughter and for women in general, what does the world look like if your drugs are successful? What would be the end game with your therapeutics?
So right now, even though women outlive men statistically, there's this misconception, women outlive men. We do statistically by a couple of years, but we are sick for 25% longer of our lifespan than men. And so what that means is that women and men are not aging equitably. They aren't aging together. And a lot of men share this pain with me. They come to sessions that I, will moderate on the future of menopause, for example. And I always have men, Jess, who come and say, how do I support my partner? She's really struggling. Or how do I support my family member? And what we want is we want a future, first and foremost, where men and women age on that same timeline. So we want women to age like a fine wine as well, not just men. And so I think that's really important, is just to equalize the aging trajectory between men and women. And I think the biggest point of leverage to do that is to not have our gonads stop functioning in midlife. Because it's not just that they stop functioning, it's the rate of decline. Biology doesn't like big changes, as you guys know, right? Biology likes, slow and subtle changes, if any. And with testicular function, it peaks in your teens, and then it goes down linearly throughout your lifespan. And is aligned with the modern lifespan. So testicular function ends somewhere in the late 90s, but most men don't live past that, so they don't experience that. And it also declines linearly and slowly, so their bodies adjust. Though we're also learning about the risk of decline in testicular function. We're starting to add back testosterone and these types of things for men as well. For women, it doesn't decline linearly. It declines linearly early in life, and then starting in about your 30s, it declines more than linearly, and you fall off a cliff. And that cliff is what leads to things like perimenopausal symptoms. So this is why 80% of women going through this have sleep disturbances. They have hot flashes. What underlies all of those, like, let's say pesky, what feel like lifestyle factors, is tons of disrupted physiology that's causing the brain to shrink. It's disrupting metabolism. It's disrupting the immune system and leading to chronic inflammation, which we know is one of the big no-nos for longevity. And so the dream really is to enable women to have that physiology decline slowly, linearly, like testicular function over the lifespan, so that women can be doing the triathlons and be doing all those things that you kind of, when you think of like a healthy older man, you have this picture in your head, is harder for women to track, which is really tough. And I think that it's not just about healthy aging, Greg. It's about a healthy society, because a lot of these women are also like just hitting their stride when their body starts to fall apart. And what a lot of women don't realize, because most women equate menopause with hot flashes, is even if they aren't having hot flashes, what they don't realize is their joint pain or their brain fog or their sleep issues, right? The change in sex drive, skin changes, hair changes, these can all be traced back to the fact that this vital organ isn't working anymore. So I have decided I'm not going into menopause. That's not happening to me. My daughter's not going into menopause. I refuse to accept menopause as an idea. It's a choice. Women can choose to go into menopause, right? That women can choose to have unmedicated birth. They can make all sorts of choices. They can choose to not take birth control. But right now, women who want to choose to maintain their ovarian function don't have that. So I think a future in which women have that choice, I want my daughter to look back just as shocked by how we all lived as I do when I look back on my grandmother. She had no birth control. There were no C-sections. Like, you made it or you didn't. There were no interventions that could get her through that, which seems horrifying and mystifying to me that she lived like that. She didn't even have menstrual pads, when I had a baby, she was fascinated by all the stuff, the breast pump and the this and that. She was like, oh my God, we had none of these things, and it seems like she lived in a cave somewhere in my mind to think she didn't have these technologies. I want my daughter to have that wow moment when she's older and be like, what? You just let it shrivel up and die and you didn't do anything about it? Like, no, we just, they asked us to celebrate it.
I was thinking about the VCs and investors in general, and the preponderance of males who govern where the money is allocated. Your first question when you meet them should be, do you have a daughter or a wife? If you do, you want to invest in me, because this is going to come back to haunt you at some point in time. And I know Jess always does this. So he asks, if people want to invest in women's health, if people want to invest in you, how should they get in touch with you?
So thanks. So I could be reached at my last name, so Beim, B-E-I-M, at Celmatix, CELMATIX.com. We're actually going
Go over that
out
one
for
more
a
time,
fundraiser.
slowly.
So it's Beim, my last name, B as in boy, E-I-M as in Mary, at Celmatix, CELMATIX.com. We are actually kicking off a fundraise starting next week on the heels of both the good news, the good ARPA news, but also we also announced a breakthrough in our oral FSH. So more and more, we're relying on fertility treatments as people wait until later to have kids. And we're injecting a hormone that dates back to the 1920s. So this is a drug that's been around effectively for 100 years. We can do so much better. So we have just announced a breakthrough and have a lead compound for an oral FSH. So this would be a simple pill to replace injectables. And we're making another announcement of a third program in December. So we've got a lot of good news. We feel like it's a good time because we're always fundraising. So we're going to make it official and say that it's kicking off next week. But if anybody wants to learn more, they can reach out to me via Beim@celmatix.com. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, so both of my daughters are interested in being entrepreneurs. I want some special advice for them if you've got any.
Oh, gosh. Yes, I know. Don't wait until you're Series B to have babies. I have so many women in my network who are entrepreneurs who are waiting for the right time to start their family. Like, I just got to get through my A round. I just have to get through my B round. And then everything will calm down. It will never calm down. You will never feel like it is the right time. And you have to just do it. And I have encountered so many women who have achieved career success or not as entrepreneurs, but they either didn't get to start their families or ended up with a lot of very painful fertility treatments, or didn't get to expand their families to the size and number. And, I had my first baby at 34, my next one at 36, and my next one at 38, while fundraising, while building this company. And it was not easy, but the payoff is pretty awesome when you get to the other end of it and the company's working and you got the family that you wanted. So I just really encourage women to just go for it. And I do think it's becoming destigmatized. It wasn't cool to be a pregnant CEO 10 years ago. Now it's like a bit cooler. You know, we've been on the cover of like business magazines and stuff. So it's something that I think we're making progress on. So I think it will be easier for your daughters to be pregnant CEOs than it was for me. But the other thing that I will say has been when people say, oh my gosh, Celmatix has survived so many things that should have killed another company. Why do you think so? Because Celmatix also survived my pregnancy. So we had a lot of test runs. It's pretty distressing. You know, imagine a company where you engineer that you just take the key man out over and over again. You know what I mean? It's like the founder CEO is just gone, unreachable, is, you know, in the hospital multiple times throughout the course of the trajectory of the company. It is such a shock to the system. It causes people to level up. It forces you to get out of founder mode. You know, we hear a lot about founder mode now. Well, there's nothing that helps break a company out of founder mode than having the founder actually kind of incapacitated medically a couple of times. And so I think that my serial pregnancies throughout the history of the company, I don't think we survived despite them. I think we survived because of them, because it forced us to become a more resilient team. And a lot of those people who were partnered with me through my pregnancies are still at the company today. So it's much easier to weather the market storms and all those, you know, setbacks in science if you've already weathered that. So that's what I would say is like, have babies while you're a CEO, if you can, if that's what you want.
I love it. Greg, what do you want to finish us off with here?
No, just accolades to what you're doing, how you're thinking about this, and, you know, and the difference you'll make if successful for both of you and your families, your daughters. Amazing. Jess, do you have a final question?
Maybe more of an endorsement. You know, I've just listened in the last number of months to over 100 episodes of the 10X podcast, where he only interviews LPs of venture funds who fund like, you know, fund 1, 2, or 3, like emerging managers, right? And a number of them are in biotech. And so I get to hear this like investor perspective from the level above the VCs. And it's interesting, folks who are supporting women founders that are having outsized returns because the women who are breaking through to get the funding are like the cream of the cream, you know?
Yeah, so extraordinary.
And then, as you've just said, like this like societal awakening of women's health as a movement, as a part of the psyche, and like this glaring gap is there. And so it does feel like, you know, an awesome investment opportunity for folks who are so deep in the opportunity, who are not just getting on the bandwagon because it got popular in the last 18 months, right? But you talk about the decades of your life here. So you should probably hire me to come sell for you, and I'll come be like one of your fundraisers. Yeah. But from a purely like statistical standpoint, I mean, these fund of funds, these, you know, one of them was like a 10th generation family office. It's actually the DuPont family, right? And they're just going through this like, hey, from like an objective number standpoint, your probability of higher return goes up. And it was fascinating to hear from such a dispassionate place to back up, you know, what you're doing. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Awesome.
Well
Thank
done.
you for that.
Well, thank you for making time to do this.
Yeah, thank you guys as well. Thanks for the support.
You bet. Okay, bye, everyone.